I launched. I am about 2 months into Rhone. We have Clara here from our PR team, and really nice to see some familiar faces in the audience. But yeah, I started at Rhone 2 months ago, and I moved here from Colorado 2 weeks ago. So the day after Christmas, we picked up with our kids and our dogs and drove across the country. So I am pretty new to the brand, but really excited to talk about it because I'm a huge fan.
Absolutely. Well, great to get things started this afternoon with what I want to call the feel-good session of the day. Who wants to get excited about the brands that you buy from, the brands that you want to be a part of, and the brands that we represent here today? And really a really inspiring discussion that we want to have that involves all of you of how do you go about building a mission-driven brand. And so we're excited to hear about how Rhone has approached this and how Bethany, how you've approached this throughout your career. And, with this, again, Jake Athey, VP of Go-to-Market for Acquia's brand management business, and here to talk about building a mission-driven brand. Rhone is what we're going to talk about most, but we want to hear about your experience in building mission-driven brands throughout your career. So share more about this mission for Rhone and how did it come to be? What's your story?
So hopefully it came through a bit in the video, the idea of mental fitness. And I really like that Rhone uses mental fitness, not mental health, because there's so many brands that can speak much more to mental health than we can, right? We're not psychologists, but the idea of mental fitness really appealed to me when I started looking into the company. And the Legally Blonde quote, that was the first one that came to mind. Like exercise gives you endorphins, endorphins make you happy, happy people don't kill their husbands. There's something to that. My oldest is a teenager now, and I wouldn't say I'm usually an anxious person, but my anxiety, if anyone has teenagers, has been spiking through the roof as I kind of navigate this new realm. And I realized if I don't work out on a regular schedule, that is what helps me manage my anxiety these days. So the idea that your physical fitness and your mental fitness are intertwined was really at the start of the brand. It was founded, it's a East Coast hometown brand. It's in Stamford, Connecticut, founded by two brothers, Nate and Ben, who are like the loveliest people you'll ever meet. And it was important to them right from the beginning because they were a family that grew up talking about this, which I think a lot of people don't. And it was a men's brand. So it was founded 10 years ago for men specifically. And they kind of saw this opportunity where Lulu at the time, if you all remember, was just for women. And they were like, okay, what's the equivalent for men? So they founded Rhone, but they started doing these events that they called Mind and Muscle, where they would get together with a group of guys, a group of trainers in a local city, and they would do a group workout. And they realized organically that the guys were a lot more likely to talk to each other and kind of talk about real things and feelings after they had done a workout together. So they sort of formalized that and did more of these mind and muscle events. And I was amazed to learn from Clara that from some of these very first events 10 years ago, some of them bonded to the extent that they were groomsmen in each other's weddings. And so I have two boys. My oldest is 15. And he's having a really hard time talking about his feelings. I think maybe sometimes it can be a little bit easier for women or girlfriends, but I really like the idea that they wanted to create this safe space to kind of talk about your whole body wellness and your mind, not just your physical. So yeah, really cool brand.
I just love how you make that part of the brand story. You make it okay for men to talk about that, and I think for a lot of people, being able to see themselves in the brand that they want to buy from is critical to how we buy today. Now, you've got a lot of experience with great mission-driven brands. Tell us more about some of the brands that you've worked with in the past.
Well, it's funny. I was most recently at the North Face, hence Denver. And Ian Dewar and I and Sarah, who you heard from this morning, we all worked together at VF. They own quite a few brands. So I was at North Face, and before that, I was at Southwest Airlines. And I have definitely found myself drawn to working for brands that, for lack of a better word, give a shit. I think we've all worked at a lot of performative brands or brands that say all the right things, but behind closed doors, it's just about profit. And sure, all of the companies I've worked for, you have to make a profit. But there is a difference working with people who care and want to do more than just sell. And that was what really attracted me to, I think, all three companies. So that I've worked in travel, I've worked in retail, but that's kind of been the through line. And it is crazy going back to a smaller brand after working for these huge public companies the last 10 years. It used to take me a year to get through procurement, and now I'm like, I can do that tomorrow. What? So, scale up, scale down, but I feel like a lot of the same principles apply.
That's great. Yeah, thank you for sharing your experience beyond Rhone. So, how does Rhone ensure that its marketing strategies align with its brand mission? Talk more about your go-to-market and provide some examples share more about the campaign that was launched and some of the other initiatives and campaigns that you've been a part of.
So 2024, the 10-year anniversary, was a huge year for Rhone. They launched women's, and it took off much more than we expected it to. So it's already a significant portion of the business. And along with launching women's, they were thinking about how do we do more with this mental fitness mission. And so Rhone launched 2 big partnerships. You just saw one with the NBA. Kevin Love, if you're familiar with him, he's always been really open as a professional athlete about how he has struggled sometimes with anxiety and how he's been able to work through those. And so he has the Kevin Love Fund, which we now donate to. And I think he's the perfect ambassador for the brand. But then they also wanted to support women's sports, which I love. So they have a partnership as well with the LPGA. And through our partnership with the LPGA, if you're familiar with Lilia Vu and Lauren Hartledge, they're 2 of our female pro golfer athletes. And so I would say it's not just about supporting those organizations, but what those organizations are doing with the community. So for example, the LPGA has a girls golf academy, and we're supporting that. But they're also giving us incredible product feedback. I was in a virtual focus group with a group of pro golfers, and they do not hold back, and our product team loved it. They were like, yes, tell us everything you would change if you could. And that kind of direct feedback is just invaluable.
That's tremendous. Yeah, getting that feedback, having the the ambassadors that you have and the relationships you have, but also involving them directly into the product. That's transformational right there. Let's talk more about how emphasizing a mission-driven brand has affected your relationship with your consumers. What's the connection like there, and how are some of the initiatives that you talked about enhancing trust and loyalty? What's your loyalty business look like?
Well, I will just start by acknowledging the awful situation in LA right now. It feels a little bit weird even to be here as such a crazy situation is happening, which I know a lot of us have friends and family being affected by it. And I thought of that because, of course, some of our customers in the area have already reached out and said, hey, I lost everything. Can you help me? And like many, many brands, of course, our answer is yes. So we've been helping behind the scenes with donations and replacing items. And I think you have to walk the talk, right? You have to, if you care about your community. It's a lot of what Sarah was talking about earlier with top customers. Not just top customers, but all customers. If they've put their trust in you, how are you taking care of them when the going gets tough? And I think at Rhone, we really care about that. We have Slack, which I'm still getting used to, but there were just nonstop Slacks about what can we do, who's gathering donations. And again, I've seen that from our whole community. I think every company, every brand out there has just been rallying behind what's going on, which is awesome. Southwest really instilled that in me too. Southwest Airlines is huge on the idea of servant leadership. Like no one is too good to do anything. And Gary Kelly, the previous CEO, this has always stuck with me. I was on a flight with him once, and I was, in awe. Oh my God, this is Gary Kelly. And he's very tall. If you don't know, he's well over 6 feet. He boarded dead last. He sat in the back middle of the plane, and then he was helping the flight attendants hand out peanuts and snacks. And wow, does that stick with you as a junior employee? So I think, at Rhone, we were talking even last week as a team about we want to make sure we're going to the stores and helping out at least once a quarter, staying close to the consumer, actually hearing what the store teams have to say. I think it's really dangerous to kind of get in our corporate ivory tower and get too disconnected from what's going on the ground. So, yeah.
Well, absolutely. We talk about a lot of the, the great things you're doing and how you've built that trust and loyalty with your audience. What are some of the challenges that you faced in maintaining that mission-driven ethos while also scaling the brand, building the company? Tell us more about how you've approached that, and how do you balance those commercial objectives with the mission and making sure every employee stays grounded in that?
We have something internally that I really like called the 12 Pursuits, and this really comes from Nate and Ben. But the whole idea of Rhone is forever forward, and progress starts here. The idea that you start in your mindset, and if you get in the right mindset, you can kind of get a little bit better each day or show up for yourself a little bit better each day. So the 12 pursuits, which we've thought about taking externally, is kind of an internal focus per month. And it might be hydration or it might be sleep. And we bring in different experts just to talk to us as employees about what are some tips. Like if you're struggling with sleep, which I do, what are some ways you can do a better job of, actually disconnecting, maybe putting your phone away an hour before you go to bed and actually getting that deep, restful sleep. So I think that's a really nice way that it goes all the way through the company, from the employees to the consumers. But to the original part of your question, you can't do everything everywhere all at once. And I think that's something I've thought increasingly about in my career is sometimes you're selling, and be direct, be to the point. What are the reasons to believe? Why is this worth? Sarah was talking a lot about value. We have an expensive product and we believe the quality is worth it. So how do you communicate why it's worth paying for? And then when you're talking about your mission, do that and do that really well. But I think sometimes as marketers, we feel like we have to weave the mission into all of the selling, and it's okay to let them live separately. I think there's moments when they can live together, but it doesn't always have to.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, great. You certainly have shared some things that resonate with me and hopefully resonate with some of you. As the first session after lunch, we want to do something a little bit different to welcome questions from the audience right in the middle of our talk. So if we could see what questions you have coming up with regards to this topic of building a mission-driven brand, we'll prepare to get to the audience. And while we're getting the mics, wanted to make sure that we welcome your points of view as well as your questions. Over here.
Awesome. Thank you, Bethany. Nick from Ed Marketplace. So obviously as a mission-driven brand, but as a CMO, you're held to performance and growth targets and numbers. How do you navigate that, and really what are the goals for growth for Rhone?
Thanks, Nick. Great question. I kind of got an unbelievable brief as a new CMO. My job is to grow awareness. And that's incredible. It's also scary, right? But I think as a marketer, it always starts with the product. It's really hard to do good marketing for bad product, and the product's incredible. Kelly Cooper, who's our head of product, she was previously at Athleta early in the beginning. She's like a fabric savant. She can touch any fabric and tell you, oh, this was probably from this factory and it's X% this. And so I have the product to work with. And I think I have the great brand foundation. Now I need to grow awareness, and I need to do it in an authentic way, and I need to measure it, to your point. So as I've been diving in just the last 2 months, I would say Rhone is exceptional at kind of the traditional D2C direct response. They started as e-com, and then we added some stores, and we have some great wholesale relationships. But really, a lot of the internal marketing measurement expertise has been around exactly what you would expect. Optimizing to CAC over ROAS, a lot of last click attribution. However, right before I started, they brought on House, for incrementality measurement, and I could not agree more with Sarah. I am much more interested these days in incrementality over anything. So I think House is going to be a great partner to help us measure what is truly driving the needle versus GA4, which I'm sure we've all had a lot of fun with through that transition, what looks good on a last click basis. And I want to understand, and this is something I think VF did very well. We worked with analytic partners when I was there on just your traditional M&M. But I loved the idea of getting the base driver of marketing, like what is marketing's overall contribution to your business cross-channel? Is it 20%? Is it 25%? How is that changing over time? And starting to understand, how do you optimize those organic channels? I'm like, if I can partner with the e-com team and help improve SEO, that's less I need to spend on SEM and more I can do in brand building. So really excited to start to build on that incrementality foundation, but also start to measure more of your traditional brand metrics around awareness and consideration.
All right. We'll come back to the audience questions. Speaking of good product, good brand awareness building, and building a mission-driven brand, let's talk about sustainability, social responsibility. What does that look like at Rhone, and how are you approaching that with the brand that you have, that you come into?
Right now, the number one way is building product that lasts. And this is something I've thought a lot about working in the retail industry because we know retail contributes in a lot of negative ways. You know, if there's fast fashion, forever chemicals, that was something we were phasing out when I was at the North Face. It's something Rhone has been working on for a while, but there are real considerations there. So much clothing ends up in landfills. So actually the number one thing you can do, and the more I've talked to the experts, is build clothing that lasts and can be repaired, can be recycled, can be renewed. You know, my teen is very into thrifting. I think we're seeing more and more brands getting into the secondhand marketplace. And the idea of, if you're done with it, don't toss it, bring it back to us, we'll give you credit, and then we'll try to get this back into the ecosystem for someone who's ready to love it. So those are some of the important ways. You know, Kelly on our product team would tell you that wool is the original performance fabric, so she loves working with really, really good wool. But we're experimenting with things like, you know, packaging that's compostable, looking into warranty programs, but really all geared around that idea of quality, making things that last and that can be repurposed and repaired.
All right. Yeah, thank you. Great product that lasts. I love that. And as a consumer, as a brand owner, and really, it makes sense. It makes sense.
It's the hope.
All right. We'll get to your questions momentarily. One more question. What's the future vision? So what are some of the key areas that you plan to focus on, you know, beyond your here and now, beyond the year ahead? What's the long-term plan for how you build Rhone and the mission-driven brand that it's become?
Well, I'm so excited. I feel like Rhone is kind of one of those if you know brands. And in Colorado, where I came from, not a ton of people knew it yet. But when I shared on LinkedIn that I was coming here, I had so many friends and connections reach out and be like, oh, I love Rhone. I've been wearing it for years. So I think there is this very loyal consumer base that we've talked to in person, right? We've hosted these events. We have one-on-one conversations, but we don't do a lot on social yet. And social is my passion because that's how I came up. I worked in social at JCPenney, then Southwest, and I feel like I'm kind of part of that generation of marketers that started back when our parents were like, you're doing what? Facebook what? So I think there's so much more we can do with social media and having that two-way conversation on a regular basis. So very excited for that.
That's great. That's great. All right. I think we have about 10 minutes remaining. Let's go to some audience questions.
Hey, Bethany, Mike from Dabs Management. I'm a Connecticut resident, so I'm very familiar with Rhone for a long time. It seems like there's a very like an emotional element to the whole brand. And to go back to the social comment, how is that being translated, and what's the marketing efforts to get that message out there on social?
Great.
What are the different platforms that you're looking at?
Well, man, I know we're all wondering if TikTok is going to be around in about one more week. I personally am a huge fan. We have not done much with TikTok yet, though. I would say our primary platform is Instagram. And there's been a lot more storytelling. I don't know if you follow us, but hopefully you've seen these forever forward stories over the last year where we are actually talking to customers or brand ambassadors about what fuels them, going back to that community aspect. And when I came in and I was like, hey, what research do we have around our customers? There was some, they had done some focus groups and panels, and the number one word that came through was community. So I think you're dead on. There is this emotional aspect of both as employees and customers. A lot of people do have an emotional connection to the brand, and I think it tends to attract people who are comfortable with that, and want to be part of a community. And so definitely I want to grow Instagram more. But I think it's more about those customer stories and our employee stories. I really liked when I was interviewing and kind of digging through all the years of social, there were some interviews with our design team about why they made something. Like, what was the insight that led you to make this, and why did you make it the way you did? I want to hear more of that and more of kind of the behind the scenes. I really like when companies take that more human approach. So that would be my hope.
Hey, Jake and Bethany, thank you so much for your sharing. This is great. Bob from Captivate. So I can't think of a generation that needs your mental wellness message more than Gen Z. And as a parent of two constituents, how do you get through? And I think you were starting to answer it with social media, to the most distracted generation that has the shortest attention span.
Man, is that a great question. Wouldn't say I have a great answer, but I do think there's something to that idea we were talking about this morning of third spaces and how do you offer more and more of those. And I had an offsite with my leadership team last week, and we were talking about exactly that. And the mind and muscle events came up over and over again of both how do you curate those more regularly, either with us at our stores or with partners like a Soul Cycle or a Pure Barre. And how do you extend them to be, for both genders as well, because they were primarily focused on men in the past. But I think it's that. It's really hard. They're online all the time. To your point, it's hard to get kids away from their phones. The loneliness epidemic is real. The social media epidemic is real. And so for me, and I felt the same way at North Face, it's how do you get them away from their phones into having a real conversation? And I think Rhone struck gold with these mind and muscle events. But again, they were more focused on, maybe 20, 30-year-olds. How do we extend those and have some for teenagers? How do we host them at college campuses or other campuses? I think there's so much opportunity there coming out of COVID as we're all getting back to IRL to really try to tackle that and then figure out how to scale it. But great question. It's on my mind too.
Okay, we can maybe take one more if we have any. If not, how about we give a round of applause? That was fantastic.
Thank you, guys.
Yep, thank you.